Ashwood House stood there, silent and solitary, like a giant ghost swallowed by the deep forest. Vines clung tightly to its walls, as if they were bony fingers squeezing the last breath out of the house. Mark and Claire Sullivan never wanted to return. This was where their childhood memories lay buried beneath layers of dust and unspeakable secrets. But their mother's death, like an invisible thread, had pulled them back. The house was now theirs, an unwanted inheritance, a curse disguised as a legacy. As Mark's car rolled along the rough dirt road, the trees on either side reached out like skeletal arms, eager to touch them. The headlights pierced the moonless night, illuminating Ashwood House, a massive silhouette with hollow windows, like the eyes of a corpse staring blankly. Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter, his breath caught in his chest. Beside him, Claire sat still, her hands twisted tightly together, her gaze fixed on the house as if it were whispering something only she could hear. No one spoke when Mark killed the engine. The sound died, and a suffocating silence enveloped them. The silence of a place long devoid of life, or worse, where life had become something twisted and terrifying. The car door screeched sharply as Mark pushed it open, the sound echoing through the still air like a warning. Gravel crunched under his feet, each step as if awakening something slumbering in the shadows. Claire hesitated, her eyes locked on the front door. Once painted a cheerful green in her memory, now a peeling gray patch, gaping like the mouth of a hungry monster. They stepped onto the porch, the wooden floor groaning under their weight, each creak a whisper from the past. "Go back. Don't come in." But they had no choice. Mark fumbled for the old key their mother had left, his hand trembling as he inserted it into the lock. The door creaked open with a dry crack, and a blast of icy air swept out, carrying the scent of mildew, decayed dried flowers, and something sweetly sickening, as if death itself was perfuming the air. Claire flinched, her heart pounding, but Mark forced a weak smile, trying to hide his fear. "It's just a house," he said hoarsely, but his eyes darted away, unwilling to look into the darkness inside. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping into another world. The air was thick and heavy, as though hundreds of invisible eyes were watching their every move. Claire flipped a light switch, but nothing happened. Darkness reigned, arrogant and impenetrable. Mark swept his flashlight across the room, the weak beam revealing eerie shapes. Dust-covered furniture shrouded like motionless ghosts, torn wallpaper hanging like flayed skin, and their grandfather's clock looming in the corner, its hands frozen as if it had died long ago. But what sent a chill down Claire's spine was the feeling that the house knew they had arrived. It wasn't just rotting wood, it was alive, it was breathing, and it was waiting. Mark dropped his bag to the floor, the thud too loud in the silence, like a challenge thrown into the dark. "I'll go find the breaker," he said, trying to sound calm, then disappeared down into the basement. Claire remained alone in the cold living room. She pulled out 2 candles from her bag, the tiny flames flickering, pushing the darkness back a few paces. But the light only seemed to highlight the room's strangeness. Grandma Rose's armchair gently rocking, though there was no wind. An old photo peeking from beneath a dusty cloth showing her mother in youth, smiling brightly beside Grandma Rose, a smile later erased by sorrow and mad mutterings about voices in the house. Then came a heavy thud from upstairs, as if something had collapsed onto the floor. Claire jumped, the candle in her hand flickering, nearly going out. "Mark?" she called, her voice trembling, but only silence answered. The sound came again, louder, closer, like footsteps from an uninvited guest. Her heart pounded, eyes fixed on the staircase leading into the engulfing darkness above. A faint whisper brushed past her ear, so soft she wasn't sure if she'd really heard it. But it sounded like her name, spoken by a distant, cold voice filled with longing. The hairs on her neck stood on end. Ashwood House wasn't just a house, it was a trap, and they had walked right into it. Night fell over Ashwood House like a suffocating, pitch-black curtain, as if the darkness itself were alive, breathing with the house. The small fire Mark had lit in the fireplace cast only twisted shadows onto the walls, long and writhing, dancing to a tune only they could hear. Claire curled under a blanket, her eyes scanning the room, heart pounding with every little sound. The creak of wood, the wind whistling through the cracks, or the sudden ticking of their grandfather's clock. which was supposed to be long dead. Mark sat nearby, holding an old radio, but it returned only a hiss of static. He turned it off, and in that brief silence they both felt a presence, not each other's but something lurking in the darkness. Claire broke the silence, her voice trembling like a candle in the wind. "Do you remember anything from when we were kids?" Mark stared into the fire, the red glow reflecting in his eyes, highlighting the tension etched across his face. "Only bits and pieces," he said, his voice low and tight. "Some happy days, until the last time." Claire nodded, memories washing over her like an icy tide. The last time they'd come here she was only 7, sent home early with their uncle, while Mark stayed behind with their mother. That night, something terrible had happened, a secret their mother never spoke of. But it had changed her into a shadow of herself, always muttering about figures in the hallway, about her father, Thomas, who had died in this house long ago. Suddenly, a sharp crash rang out from the kitchen, like a metal pot hitting the floor. They both jumped. Claire clutched the blanket tighter, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't go," she whispered, but Mark had already grabbed the flashlight and moved toward the shadowy room. The light swept across and a small black shape darted across the floor, a weasel disappearing into a cracked cabinet. "Just a wild animal," Mark said, his voice lighter, but Claire didn't believe him. The noise had been too loud, too deliberate, like an invitation to peer deeper into the dark. The night wore on, and as Claire drifted into a restless sleep, Mark stayed alert, though he wasn't sure what he was watching for. His eyelids grew heavy, the fire slowly dying, and then came a creaking sound from the hallway, clear and slow, like footsteps tiptoeing across the wooden floor. He sat up, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the door. The grandfather clock had gone silent. Another creak, closer this time. Then a series of gentle knocks at the front door. Knock, 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 polite yet filled with menace. Claire woke, her voice shaky. "What was that?" "There's someone at the door," Mark whispered, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. He stepped toward the door, each footfall like treading on thin ice. The knocks came again, patient, waiting. "Who's there?" he called out, but only suffocating silence answered. He turned the knob and cracked the door open, flashlight slicing through the empty porch. No one. No footprints on the wet gravel. A cold wind blew through, carrying the breath of the deep woods. Mark slammed the door shut and locked it. "No one's there," he said, but his voice faltered. And Claire, standing behind him, whispered, "I heard it, Mark. Someone was there." They looked at each other, fear spreading like a silent contagion. Something was toying with them, and it wasn't human. The gray light of morning did nothing to lift the heavy feeling. They searched the house for their mother's documents, but every corner felt like it held a hidden, watching eye. In the master bedroom, where Grandma Rose had died, Claire wiped dust from the mirror, and for a split second she saw a third figure reflected. A thin old woman in a lace nightgown, sunken eyes staring. She spun around, nothing. Then the mirror cracked with a sudden snap, spiderweb fractures racing across the glass. Mark dropped the box he was holding. "We have to leave, Mark," Claire whispered, her voice unsteady. "This house, it's angry." They found Grandma Rose's journal in an old desk, its yellowed pages recounting a quiet life, until the final entries. The handwriting grew shaky, erratic. "I hear him at night. Thomas knocks at the door, but I know he died 10 years ago. He wants me to come with him. Last night I saw him at the foot of my bed, smiling. I'm not afraid to die." Claire read aloud, tears sliding down her cheeks. Rose had seen Thomas's ghost, seen him and accepted her fate. But as Claire looked up, a loud bang echoed from downstairs, as if the front door had slammed shut on its own. That was enough. They gathered the papers and rushed to leave, but the front door wouldn't budge, as if held by an unseen hand. Together they pulled, and it burst open, a frigid wind roaring through, snuffing out candles and lamps alike. In the absolute darkness, a child's laugh echoed from upstairs, clear and innocent, yet cold enough to chill their bones. Darkness swallowed Ashwood House as the front door burst open, leaving Mark and Claire standing on the porch, breath heavy in the freezing wind. The sound of a child's laughter still echoed from the upper floor, buried beneath distant thunder, like a taunt from the dead. Claire bolted into the yard, her bare feet sinking into the wet grass, but when she looked back she saw Mark frozen in place, eyes fixed on the car. All 4 tires were flat, shredded with deep gashes, as if clawed by some invisible beast. "How?" Claire stammered, but Mark didn't answer. He swept his flashlight across the yard, the beam flickering over silent shrubs and an empty gravel path. No footprints. No presence. Just them and the house growling behind them. Rain began to fall, each drop heavy and loud, mingling with the ever-nearing thunder. "The truck," Mark suddenly rasped. In the old barn, it might still run. It was a slim hope, but enough to draw them across the overgrown garden, where dead branches reached out like hands trying to hold them back. The barn loomed in a flash of lightning, its swollen door groaning as they pried it open. Inside, the air reeked of old gasoline and dust. Mark's flashlight fell upon a rusted truck, draped in a tarp like a shrouded corpse. He yanked the tarp away, a cloud of grime erupting, but their hope crumbled instantly. The tires were flat, the engine lifeless, dead for decades. They were trapped. Then through the howling rain came another sound, a faint, high-pitched melody drifting from the house. Claire recognized it instantly, the lullaby from her mother's music box, the one they'd left on the mantel. Now it played by itself, each note slow and haunting, like an irresistible summons. "Mom," Claire whispered, stepping toward the house, tears mingling with rain. Mark grabbed her hand, pulling her back. "It's not her, Claire. Don't listen to it." But suddenly warm light flared from the front door. The fireplace, long extinguished, now burned bright, casting flickering shadows across the porch. Who had relit the flame? They had no choice. Hand in hand, they crossed the threshold once more, and the door closed gently behind them as if guided by unseen hands. The music box tune grew louder, leading them into the living room. Standing before the fire was a figure, a woman in a simple dress, silver hair loosely tied, her form soft and misty like smoke. "Grandma," Claire whispered, recognizing Rose from old photographs. The ghost turned, her milky eyes filled with sorrow, though her lips curled into a gentle smile. Mark stepped forward, voice choked. "Grandma, is it really?" But a thunderous crash from upstairs cut him off, and Rose's smile twisted into terror. They looked toward the stairs. A flash of lightning revealed a tall figure at the top, a man in an old-fashioned suit, half his face swallowed by shadow. Thomas, their grandfather, or whatever was left of him. His eyes glowed, a mix of longing and rage locked on Rose. "I won't go with you," she whispered, her voice thin as wind, retreating toward the fire. Thomas descended, each step a heavy thud that shook the house. Wind howled, papers flew, and Mark shouted, "We have to stop him." Claire dashed forward, placing herself between the two spirits. "Leave her alone," she screamed, but Thomas halted only briefly, his black eyes piercing into her like frozen blades through flesh. The music box began to slow, its tune warping, and Thomas roared, "You are mine." He lunged, darkness erupting. The fire died, furniture flew, and an invisible force slammed Mark into the wall. Claire screamed, ducking a flying vase, and lunged for the music box on the mantel. "You don't belong here," she shouted, hands shaking as she twisted the key backward, stopping the tune mid-note. The house convulsed. Rose backed toward them, seeking shelter. Mark grabbed a fireplace poker, raising it. "You can't have us," he yelled. Thomas shrieked and lunged again, but as the poker pierced through him, he exploded into black smoke, screaming, then shot upward into the attic, vanishing with a heart-wrenching wail. Silence returned, broken only by the fading rain. Rose stood before them, softer than ever. "Thank you," she whispered, her ghostly hand brushing Claire's hair with a comforting chill. She pointed to the journal on the floor, then glanced up at the attic, where Thomas remained trapped. As dawn broke, she looked at them one last time, her eyes shimmering. "Live," she said, then dissolved into the first golden rays of sunlight, leaving the room bathed in pale glow. The house was quiet, but the attic still exuded an eerie cold, as if Thomas was still watching, still waiting. Mark and Claire cleaned in silence as if tending a grave. They fixed the car, took the journal, and left as dusk turned the road to gold. Claire looked back, her eyes catching the attic window. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw Thomas's pale face pressed against the glass, but it vanished instantly. "Do you think he'll ever find peace?" she asked. Mark held her hand, his voice low. "Let's hope she'll help him." They drove off, leaving Ashwood House in silence. A quiet witness to the past where shadows still lurked, but light had begun to seep in, one fragile ray at a time.